So a friend of mine asked how to communicate between an Arduino and a computer using the built-in serial port, and I thought I'd do a short video showing you how to set up the software, how to write the simple Java program, and make a basic graphical user interface to show the value of a potentiometer. So we have an Arduino here, and I have a potentiometer hooked up. And so you have, of course, one edge of the potentiometer goes to ground, one edge goes to 5 volts, and then the wiper is the actual reading, which goes to a 0, the first analog pin. And so it's a simple potentiometer with a knob on it, and let's get going. All I'm assuming is that you have the Arduino software installed. We're going to need to install a few items. We're going to need to install a JDK, a Java Development Kit, which will let you actually make Java programs. You probably already have a JRE, a runtime environment, installed, but that will not let you make Java programs, so we need the JDK. I'm also going to use Eclipse, which is a Java IDE, to make the Java program. And then we're going to use a very simple and easy to use library for Java called Serial-Comm. And let's go ahead and download those items. So if you bring up a web browser, you type in JDK, it'll take you to the Oracle website. You go ahead and download the latest version. You'll have to accept the license and download it. While that's downloading, we're also going to need Eclipse. So you go to download and download it. And now that's downloading. And finally we need Serial-Comm, which is a library for Java. So you type in Java Serial-Comm. Go here. If you go to downloads, serialcomm.jar, click on the file. And it'll say it can harm your computer. Well, that's because it's a program. It's fine. So we're going to go ahead and keep it. And we're almost done downloading. So everything's downloaded. We're going to install the JDK first. Just realized I have my duster in frame. Don't need that. Alright, so Java is now installed. We'll bring up Eclipse, which is just a compressed folder, and we'll move that folder to the desktop. Eclipse doesn't really have an installer, it's just a folder of files, and so we copy to the desktop and we can open Eclipse from within that folder. Alright, so let's close that, and let's put the Serial-Comm file on the desktop. So bring that up. Move it here. Alright, so now we have all the software we need. Let's go ahead and bring up the Arduino software. And there's a really simple sketch you can use that they provide. If you go to Examples, Basics, Analog Read Serial, we have a simple sketch that it will configure the serial port for 9600 baud, which is the most common baud rate for a serial port. It will then enter an infinite loop where it reads from the A0 pin, excuse me, and then it'll write that out to the serial port, and it'll repeat infinitely. So if we go ahead and upload that to the Arduino, alright, so it's done uploading, as we can see here. If we bring up the serial monitor, you'll see values streaming out. And so if I get this in frame, as I rotate the potentiometer, those values change. So one extreme is 1023, and the other extreme is 0, and of course everything in between. So that's great, but this isn't all that useful. Let's write a Java program that will perhaps show the value in a graphical user interface, or you could even send the value to a web server or do any other interesting thing with it. So we'll close out of the Arduino software. Let's bring up Eclipse. So if you double click on the folder, double click on Eclipse, we can then close the folder. It's going to ask about a workspace, which is where all of your Java programs will be placed. The default value is fine, and we'll tell it to use that from now on. So this is the Eclipse IDE, Integrated Development Environment. We can close the welcome screen, and we'll create a Java program. If you go to File, New, Java Project, we'll give it a project name. I'm going to call it Test1, and all the other values are fine. So you click Finish, and we see a folder here, and there's no source code in there yet. So if we right click, New, Class, I'm going to call the class main, and we want to have it create the main method. So check that box and then go to Finish, and we have a empty Java program. Now we're going to use a serial port, and there is a library that we're using to access that, and we need to add that to our Java program. So if you right click on the project, if you go to Build Path, Configure Build Path, go to the Libraries tab, click on Add External Jars. A jar is a Java archive, which is like the Java equivalent of an exe. It is the complete Java program. And I put that file on the desktop, so if we go to the desktop, we'll see Serial-Comm. So double click on that, and click OK. We'll now see over here we have a referenced libraries menu, and it'll list the jar file and the stuff it contains. It is cross-platform, so you can run it on Windows, Linux, or OS X. All the code is in a package called j.extensions.com. We'll need to import that so we can actually use it in our program. So at the very top of the file, type in import j.extensions, and it'll bring up a few options for you. So we have now connected our Java program to that library. Let's create a very simple graphical user interface. So we're going to create what's called a J-frame, which is Java's word for a window. We need to import J-frame, so if you hover over it, you can then import it. In that frame, we're going to put a what's called a J slider, which is a a little slider, which you'll see in a minute. Again, we need to import that. And let's configure that slider. The Arduino analog pins will give you a value from 0 to 1023 because it has a 10-bit ADC. So we want to set the slider's max value. Set maximum see the documentation right here. Oh, that's minimum, sorry. Set maximum. We'll set the maximum value that the slider will show. So we're going to set that to 1023 because we're going to get values from 0 to 1023. Now we need to put that slider in the window. So if you do window dot add slider. What did I mess up? Oh, I called it Windows up here. Let's call that window. There we go. So we now have put the slider in the window. We now need to size the window so that it is an appropriate size so you can actually see the contents of the window. You do that with window.pack. And finally we need to show the window. We do it with window.setVisible. Make it true. So we've created the graphical user interface. Right now it doesn't do anything, but I'll show you what it looks like. Click the play button up here. It'll run the program. We want to run main.java. We want to always save before running. And you see up here we have a very primitive window with a slider. And our goal is to make that slider move when you move the potentiometer on your Arduino. So we're going to close the window. I'm going to go back to our code here. So now we need to interact with the serial port. There is a class in our Serial-Comm library called Serial-Comm. And one of the methods in that class will give you an array of serial ports because your computer, even though it might not appear like it, it actually has multiple serial ports in most cases. So we're going to do a Serial-Comm ports array. And we're going to call a static method called getCommPorts. So now we have an array of ports that represent each serial port on your computer. We need to show them to the user so that they can pick the appropriate port. Now ideally you do it in a graphical user interface to make it really easy and convenient, but to keep this example short, I'm going to do it with a command line interface. So let's print out to the command line. System.out.println. Select a port. And then now we need to show the actual ports. An easy way to loop through an array in Java is with a special type of for loop. Like that. And what it does is you have an array called ports, and this loop will iterate through it and pull out a port and give that to you in your loop. And of course you need to give it a data type, which is Serial-Comm. So we need to print this out. We should print a number before the port so the user can specify a number. Let's create an integer. Make it 1. If we print out that number, increment it, and then we're going to put a colon and a space. Actually, let's do a period and a space. And you'll see why when it prints out, don't worry, it's kind of confusing right now. And then we're going to call port.get, and you might be tempted to use get descriptive port name, but that's actually not as useful as you might think. If you do get system port name, it'll show like COM1, COM2, the name you're probably thinking of. And so that'll print out our menu. So if we run the program again, you'll see they're printed out, select a port, and then we have numbers. And that's what the period and space is for. It's just to make it easier to understand the menu. Now let's close the program, so you click the terminate button. Now we need to read from the user's input. Easy way to do that is with a scanner. Well, my camera battery died, but we're back now. Okay, so we need to read from the command line to get the user's choice. We can do that with a scanner, which is a class in Java, so we need to import that. Scanner s is equal to new scanner. We need to connect it to system.in, which is basically the command line keyboard, if you want to think of it like that. And then we need to get the value the user typed in. So we're going to call that an integer, chosen port. We're going to do s dot next int. So now we know what they typed in. So they typed in either a 1 or a 2 in this particular case. And we need to get that port. And so we're going to do Serial-Comm port. And we're going to do ports, chosen port -1. Now, we need to do the -1 because the user typed in a 1 or a 2. However, arrays start at 0, so that'll actually be a 0 or a 1 index for the array. So we now have the port, and one of the important things you need to do is set the timeouts. I've noticed that this isn't actually all that important in Linux, but in Windows it will not work if you fail to do that. So let's open the port and set the timeouts. Now you can do port.open port. However, it returns a boolean to let you know if it succeeded or not. So let's put that in a if statement. So if that returned true, we were able to open the port. And I should really put there. And then if it returned false, we will print that out. And for this simple program, we're just going to exit. We're not going to do a loop to let them try again. So by now we have hopefully opened the port, and we need to set the timeouts. So if we do port.set, got a bunch of options here. One of them is set COM port timeouts. So double click on that. Timeout mode is a constant that is defined in the class. So if you do Serial-Comm dot, we scroll down, timeout. We want read semi-blocking. So double click on that. And then we have the two timeout values. We can set them to 0, which essentially means there's no timeout, just keep waiting, which is what you probably want. So now we have the port and it's all set up. And what we can do now is we can actually read from it. So we're going to use another scanner to read from the port. I'm going to call it, let's call it data, since we're getting data from it. We're going to do new scanner. And this time, instead of using system.in, we're going to do port.get, input stream. And then we need to enter a loop to print out, or to, well, to read out the value. So we create a while loop, and we're going to do data dot has next line. And what it's going to do is this loop is going to keep executing. It's going to wait for input from your serial port, from your Arduino. Now what you can do, just as a really simple demo, is print out the values to the command line, which will be very similar to the Arduino serial monitor. And so we can then do data dot next line, and let's see what happens. So if we click play, we have our little graphical program here, but it's not actually going to work yet. If we go to the command line, I happen to know that my Arduino is on COM 3, but you can always guess and check, and if you guessed wrong, come back later. And so it said successfully open the port, and then now it's printing out all the values. So if I move the potentiometer, the values change, as you would expect. Okay, but that's really boring. That isn't really much more different than what the Arduino software provided. So let's actually have it update that graphical interface. We're going to need to extract that number as an integer. So we're going to do int. I'm going to call it number. And if you do data dot, you might be tempted to use like next int, but I've found that to be a little bit buggy. I'm not sure if it's the serial port library or what, but I find it works much better just to go a line at a time. So that's going to return a string, but obviously we don't want a string, we want an integer. So we're going to do integer.parseInt. And we're going to put that in there. So now we have it as an integer, and the only issue is sometimes when you first connect to the serial port, the first reading will be corrupt. And so if you leave it like this, you can actually get an exception where it was not able to convert the corrupted value to an integer. So what we want to do is put this in a try-catch block so that if it cannot convert it to an integer, it will just try again instead of crashing the whole program. So here, I'm going to put that on its own line, and then we're going to do a try-catch block. Try number equals, and then we need to catch an exception, and we're not actually going to do anything with it because we don't care to try to recover from this corrupt data. We're just going to ignore it. And so now in our loop it will try, if at all possible, to update the number. Now let's use that number to update that slider in our graphical program. So our slider is called slider. So we do slider dot set value, and we're going to pass it the number that we just read. Oh yeah. So you probably should initialize that to 0. Okay. So there's your code. And let's see if it works. So we have our graphical program right here. It isn't doing anything yet. We need to tell it what COM port to listen to. I'll press 2. And it connected to the COM port. And if we now look at our program, as I turn the potentiometer, the program updates. So it's a really simple example, but you should get the idea of how to go from here. If you are familiar with Java, it should be trivial. And if you're not, I'll probably post a few videos later on showing how to interact with websites, to, for example, upload sensor data to a website, or perhaps maybe even a database, a local database. You can maybe show like a line graph of values. Anyway, if you like the video, let me know. If not, let me know. Comments down below. Hopefully this is helpful. I know that a lot of people would like to communicate between their Arduino and a computer, so I thought I'd do a little demo of a very simple kind of hello world level project to get you started. Good luck and have fun.